Okay, how the philosophy of Hegel influenced Scriabin in his musical compositions. My name is David Proud. I'm at the Irish Institute at Liverpool University and I'm currently doing my PhD with my thesis on James Joyce Finnegan's Wake seen through the lens of the philosophy of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. My academic background is chiefly in philosophy, and I would like to say something concerning Scriabin and the philosophy of Hegel that had its influence on how he composed. I am neither a musician nor a musicologist, but I can still philosophize about music, just as you do not need to be a scientist or a mathematician to philosophize about science or mathematics. And Hegel himself was quite conscious of the limitations of his musical competence, albeit he was a concert goer and an opera goer, like me. He never claimed to be musically educated, but saw himself compelled to speak extensively about music in virtue of the fact that he conceived of philosophy in the singular, the existence of numerous hyphenated philosophies with which we are familiar nowadays could never be the final word. Philosophy, rather, is possible only as a system that embraces the whole of reality. Hence, the part of the system had to deal with music. Conversely, the philosophy of music has to fit into the systematic theory as a whole, something that is possible only if it itself was systematically organized. Aesthetics as systematic philosophy, but one that is rich in factual and truth content, and hence has all the vividness of a musician's aesthetics. Scriabin wished to connect music to philosophy. Leonid Leonardovich Sabanev, musicologist and former classmate of Scriabin's, as well as being an expert on his music, reported that from time to time I heard rumors about Scriabin and his strange ideas. He was said to be half mad and wanted to combine music with philosophy. Sabanev goes on to explain this enterprise struck Scriabin's contemporaries as pretentious. A philosopher, he thinks he has combined music and philosophy. Indeed, how do you reconcile his multicolored waistcoats and lacquered boots with philosophy, I thought. It is well known that the theosophy of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky stimulated Scriabin's interest, a strangeness that led to charges of his meddling with mumbo-jumbo. But Scriabin was certainly immersed in philosophy, very well versed in, among other things, Arthur Schopenhauer, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling, Immanuel Kant, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Indeed, Scriabin frequently quoted Hegel, who said that quantity, growing indefinitely, transforms into quality, and this is a manifestation of inner experience, as he speculated that the entire history of the world also obeyed this evolutionary process of gradual accumulation and growth, and upon reaching a degree of saturation, humankind must terminate in a world catastrophe, leading in turn to a new evolution, a new increase in tension, and a new crisis. Scriabin associated this philosophy of life with the specific structure of his major works, which to him represented a series of gradual expansions systematically and logically evolving in the direction of a final ecstasy. His late sonatas, for instance, are constructed according to a uniform succession of states. The Piano Sonata No. 6, Opus 62, for instance, the one that Scriabin reportedly never played in public, for he was in fear of its darkness. In this work there were formal tensions created by the absence of harmonic contrast. To get a fuller grasp on how Hegel influenced the way Scriabin composed, however, we need to delve into the particular philosophical ideas of Hegel that so captured his imagination. that of quality and quantity transforming into each other. As Hegel wrote in The Phenomenology of Spirit, it is not difficult to see that ours is a birth time and a period of transition to a new era. Spirit is broken with the world it has hitherto inhabited and imagined, and is of a mind to submerge it in the past and in the labour of its own transformation. Spirit is indeed never at rest, but always engaged in moving forward. But just as the first breath drawn by a child after its long, quiet nourishment breaks the gradualness of merely quantitative growth, there is a qualitative leap when the child is born. So likewise the spirit in its formation matures slowly and quietly into its new shape, dissolving bit by bit the structure of its previous world, whose tottering state is only hinted at by isolated symptoms. The frivolity and boredom which unsettle the established order, the vague foreboding of something unknown, these are the heralds of approaching change. The gradual crumbling that left unaltered the face of the world, of the whole, is cut short by a sunburst which in one flash illuminates the features of a new world. So, spirit is always moving on, spirit is always progressing. Ours is a birth time and a period of transition to a new era. A birth time, that is to say, something new was entering the stage. This is not merely a period of transition, for we are forever engaged in transitions. Rather, this is the dividing point when something new is occurring, bringing with it a vague foreboding of the kind which we can detect in Scriabin's Sixth Piano Sonata. Albeit it is a dark uncertainty rather than a blinding one that Scriabin feared. What is transpiring between qualitative and quantitative, and which ultimately culminates in a new world bursting out, is like a sunburst, a kind of dramatic change in which everything becomes illuminated and looking different in a sunburst. It might dazzle, or it might be more than you could take in, but the spirit's imagination is going to be liberated in all of this as well. There is quantitative growth, but if all that is seen is this quantitative growth, then it could not be foretold that there would be a qualitative leap. And yet so there is. And there is a qualitative leap in all sorts of processes where the quantitative can increase as much as it wants, but once it reaches a certain point, something new happens and a new world opens up. A new condition, something higher with greater possibilities occurs. So, how does that connect with the music of Scriabin? Well, for Hegel, the transformation of quantity and quality into each other points towards the essence underlying them, and this may take some unraveling, not that the basic concepts are difficult to grasp, but in the science of logic it is actually quality that comes first, although quantity will transition back to quality. Quality in philosophy is an attribute, and Hegel equates it with determinacy, or determinateness, or determinate being. The quality of a judgment is to do with its being positive, negative, or infinite, and Hegel is rather disposed to conflate this with the judgments ascribing a quality to something. Quantity is how large or how much, and Hegel argues that quality and quantity united in a certain way is measure. And through measure we will eventually arrive at elective affinity, and for Hegel all musical compositions are elective affinities. A quantity may be extensive, the number of objects, the extension of something in space or the duration of an event in time, or intensive, the strength of a force, the weight of an object, the degree of its temperature. Any quantity must be both extensive and intensive, since, for instance, an entity must have not only a size and a duration, but in addition some distinctive quality, and hence a certain degree of that quality. And intensive quantity can only be measured by correlating it with an extensive quantity. The limit of quantity is bounded by something different from itself, and qualitative features are required for non-arbitrary boundaries between things. The enduring feature of an entity within the sphere of quantity is the characteristic that it can be increased or decreased indefinitely. Quality and quantity thus united are measure. Measure means proportion, dimension, degree, A measure or bar in music refers to a single unit of time featuring a specific number of beats played at a particular tempo. So, when writing music on a page, composers break their compositions into measure. Digestible sections assist players perform the music as intended. In Scriabin's Piano Sonata No. 3, Opus 23, the first movement, Dramatico, opens with a dramatic first theme in F sharp minor with measures 1 and 2 presenting the insistent rhythmic motifs which will pervade throughout the section. A coda follows at measure 1 through 5 subdivided into two parts. The first is triumphant fortissimo statement of the descending motif of the second theme over the first theme, and the second an exact transposition of the codetta of the exposition, which also features the same thematic suspension, or the same thematic superpositioned, leading the whole movement to a calm end. This illustrates rather nicely, actually, how music, and this is Hegel's thoughts on music I'm giving here, like poetry, is a romantic art for two reasons. First, romantic art is concerned with action and conflict, not repose, and music and poetry are by their very nature fitted to represent action and movement. And second, the material media of music and poetry are more ideal, more removed from the purely material plane than, say, architecture and sculpture. Music abstracts from space altogether and subsists in time only, and its medium is tone. Hegel's central idea is that the quality of an entity and its quantity are initial independently of each other. Water may be hot or cold while still remaining water. However, there are in both extensive and intensive quantity limits beyond which quantitative variation produces qualitative change. Hegel focuses upon cases where qualitative changes, like knots on a piece of string, occur only intermittently in the course of continuous quantitative change. Water, heated sufficiently, becomes steam, and cooled sufficiently, ice. Its undergoing some such qualitative change is essential if we are to measure its temperature, and this raises the prospect of an endless increase and decrease in, for instance, temperature, not at intervals by an infinity of qualitative change. And yet Hegel sees the transformation of quality and quantity into each other as pointing towards the essence that is underlying them. Music negates space altogether and exists only in time. Hence, since whatever is seen by the eye must exist in space, music ceases to address the sense of sight and makes its appeal to the sense of hearing. Its material medium is therefore the succession of sounds or tones in time, and this complete negation of space makes music a purely subjective art. A statue has independent existence of its own in space. It is an independent thing. And this objectivity is in painting, that objectivity that is in painting is partially annulled. The picture is only its appearance. Nonetheless, even the picture has an external existence, a thing, whereas musical tone has no such permanence or subsistence. In the very moment of its utterance it vanishes and ceases to exist. It has thus no genuine objectivity. Hence, in the case of music, the separation of object and subject present in the other arts does not arise. The spectator contemplates the statue or the picture as something outside himself. The ego in such a case is separate from its object, but since this external objectivity disappears in music, the separation of the work of art from its beholder disappears also, and the musical work penetrates therefore into the very core of the soul and is one with subjectivity. It is for the same reason that music is the most emotional of the arts. In sensation, thought, and conception, the subject stands over against the object, contemplating it, and in emotion, this separation is absent, and the soul is absorbed in its object in a thoroughgoing identity. Identity in the sense that the soul is not in such a case aware of the distinction between itself and the object, since awareness is not an emotional but a cognitive state. Hence, music appeals immediately to the emotions. Even in nature, cries are recognized as a direct expression of the inner emotional life, but a mere medley of sounds or cries is not itself art. It only becomes art when the soul has ordered it into an architectonic fabric of ordered relations, and such ordered relations introduce unity into the differences of sound. So a mere crude plurality is not beautiful, but a plurality which is throughout governed and controlled by a unifying principle discloses the idea and is therefore beautiful. Symmetry and conformity to rule, the equality of time beats, and the inequality of tone lengths are here of importance, and both harmony and melody are modes of introducing unity into the quantitative and qualitative differences of tone. Rhythm and time beat perform a special function in music, as also in poetry. The philosophical basis of time beat and the explanation of the extraordinary grip which it has on the soul consists in the fact that the ego finds it in the absolute counterpart of itself. Time in itself is an even undifferentiated continuous flow, and this abstract continuity corresponds to the bare universality of the ego, which is empty of content. But the true nature of the ego is not this abstract universality. Only when the ego has sundered itself in twain, made itself into an object to itself, and again annulled this division and returned into itself, is its real nature disclosed. Now time beat introduces into the abstract continuity of time a division into equal intervals, but every moment of time, though this distinguished from the next moment, is nevertheless identical with it. For one moment of time is indistinguishable from another. Each is now. Time beat therefore introduces division into the bare continuity of time, and this sundering is again annulled in the absolute identity of the intervals. The ego finds itself in this process, for it finds there a bare unity, sundering itself and again returning into unity and identity with itself. Hence the profound satisfaction which the time beating music produces in us. So with measure we come to elective affinity, and for Hegel, as previously stated, all musical compositions are elective affinity. An expression that comes from a chemical relation, although it's actually, I believe, not that it's my area of expertise, but I believe it's obsolete in chemistry now. But Hegel's discussion of it follows on from a discussion of neutrality and affinity. In the chemical realm, a matter receives its specific determinant essentially in the connection with its other. It exists concretely only as is this non-indifference, and furthermore this specific connection is bound up with quantity and is at the same time not only connection with a single other, but with a series of such non-indifferent matters standing over and against it. Combinations with this series rest upon a so-called affinity with every member of the series, albeit in this indifference each member excludes every other. What we have here is a connection of opposite determinations, yet it is not merely in the chemical sphere that specificity is exhibited in a circle of combinations. The meaning of a single musical note also depends on its relation to and combination with another musical note, and a series of other musical notes. The harmony or disharmony in which a circle of combination constitutes its qualitative nature, which is at the same time based upon quantitative ratios that form a series of exponents, and the ratios of the two specific ratios is what each of the combined musical notes is within it. The single musical note is the keynote of a system, yet at the same time also one member in the system of every other note. The harmonies are exclusive elective affinities whose characteristic quality nonetheless equally dissolves against the externality of mere quantitative progress. The system of natural numbers exhibits a nodal line of qualitative moments which issue in a mathematical progression. In one respect, this progression is a merely quantitative running back and forth, a constant adding and subtracting, each number standing in the same arithmetical relation to the one preceding or following it, as this last stands to the one preceding it or following it in turn, and so on. But the numbers that thus arise also stand to the others that either precede or follow them in some specific relation, whether as a multiple of one of them expressed in the form of a whole number, or as a power or root. In the quantitatively measured scale of musical relations, the quantum gives rise to a relation of harmony in the progression of musical notes, without that quantum having on the scale any other relation to the preceding and the succeeding ones than these have in turn to the preceding and following them. The musical notes that follow seem increasingly to recede from the keynote or numbers to become just other numbers in their arithmetical advance, and returning back suddenly burst forth a surprising accord, for which there is no qualitative preparation in what immediately went before, but which appears rather to be an action at a distance, a connecting reference to something far removed, the succession of merely indifferent relations which neither alter the preceding specific reality nor otherwise form any such reality, is at once interrupted, and while from the standpoint of quantity the succession proceeds in the same manner, a specific relation breaks in through the gap. A qualitative leap. This is what captured Scriabin's imagination, his musical imagination. Nodes and leaps of this kind occur in chemical combinations as the proportions in the mixture are progressively altered, and at certain points on the scale of mixtures, two materials yield products that exhibit particular qualities. Intensity implies that the series of neutralizing measures that define the specifying measure can be arranged by the intensity with which they neutralize the specifying measures. Hence, the specified measure differ in the quantity needed to neutralize the specifying measure, and this ends up being the specifying measure's very quality. And music is the example that Hegel gives in support of this. The musical notes can be arranged into scales, and each note has an affinity with the other notes. Musical compositions are therefore elective affinities. Meanwhile, on the side of measure, the relation between qualities is quantitative, and what this means is that a progress from one quality to another is an uninterrupted continuity of the quantity, and yet at some dramatic moment, nature leaps from one quality to another, even if the quantitative change is reassuringly gradual. Gradualness, however, is the opposite of qualitative change, for in gradualness, the quality of the thing is indifferent to the quantitative change. A nodal line is like a knotted string, and between the knots is quantitative difference to which quality is indifferent, and each knot represents a qualitative change. The system of natural numbers also shows a nodal line of qualitative moments which emerge in merely the external succession. Each number in the line bears a quantitative relation to the one before or after it, but these numbers likewise have specific relations with specific numbers when a question is a power or root. And this specific relation of number is an elective affinity. Musical scale is a nodal line. A musical note is indifferent to the one before or after it. But in harmony, the musical notes have specific relations with other musical notes, analogues to the specific relations between roots and powers. As one plays musical notes, each successive one seems unrelated to the one before. Which brings us back to Scriabin. As Sabaniev said, Scriabin was the true poet of tonal erotic caresses, and he can torture and sting and torment and fondle and tenderly lull with pungent sonorities. There is a whole science of tonal love in his compositions. This eroticism is his most delicate and unseizable trait. Scriabin's philosophical outlook certainly took a decidedly erotic turn. In his imagination, the cosmic finale assumed the dimensions of a grandiose sexual act in his aromatic, mystical, philosophically charged poetry. Scriabin enthuses in the dreamy fantasies that characterized the Russian symbolist poetry of his day. The ardor of the instants gives birth to eternity, light in the depths of space. Infinity breathes with worlds. Ringing sounds envelop silence. The great comes to pass, and sweet delightful love is born anew. The cosmic finale would have been Mysterium Pliable, preparation for the final mystery, but he died leaving only sketches for what might have been. A synthetic work exploiting the sense of smell and touch, as well as hearing, a birth time, a transition to a new era. There will not be a single spectator, all will be participants. The work requires special people, special artists, and a completely new culture. The cast of performers includes an orchestra, a large mixed choir, an instrument with visual effects, dancers, a procession, incense, and rhythmic textual articulation. The cathedral in which it will take place will not be of one single type of stone, but will continually change with the atmosphere and motion of the mysterium. This will be done with the aid of mists and lights, which will modify the architectural contours. Scriabin's erotic strain was fueled by psychoanalytical thought newly introduced into the Russian intelligentsia. By analyzing oneself psychologically, by studying oneself, man can explain everything, including the whole cosmos, said Scriabin. An outreach into the cosmos, disclosing another of Scriabin's principal fascinations, that of evolutionary drama. Cosmic history is the awakening of consciousness, its gradual illumination, its continual evolution, all of which interests coalesce around his major philosophical subject, desire. All existence is created by the power of our desire. Desire, about a subject about which Hegel also wrote a great deal, the most vital link in this affinitive chain of mutually dependent, enthusiastic philosophy, psychology, eroticism, and evolution. Scriabin's music is highly sophisticated, highly dramatic, and highly sexed.